Alright. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog 101. I wish I could have done something super cool for my 100th, but life has been interesting. So, today, water first. So, just saw a video on YouTube telling me that Digimon is 25 years old. For anyone that doesn't know, way back in the 90s, there were these things called virtual pets, which were basically an LED screen that screamed at you after it pooped. It was just this. I think Tamagotchi was the first one, but they became really popular just in general. And Tamagotchi in general tended to skew a little bit more towards a female audience, and so Bandai Namco created a virtual pet aimed at boys. And so instead of taking care of this little kind of blob and just trying to keep it alive in a very kind of motherly way, the boy version was called Digimon, which was a combination of digital monsters. And so what it was is you would start, and you would still have to raise it in a very similar way to a Tamagotchi, but you could also train it. And then these things, which I actually have, I don't know where it is, but I actually have one of the original ones. They re-released them, and my brother got me one for Christmas. But they had these little connectors at the top to where once your Digimon got out of its egg, and then it would eventually digivolve. And once it got to a certain level, you could connect it with another person's Digimon, and they could battle. And that was the thing, is you would raise this monster to battle, and then it would die, and then you'd go through it over and over and over again. I tried raising my Digimon recently when I got it like a year or so ago, maybe 2 years, I don't know. My Digimon was dead within 3 days. Like, I just absolutely murdered the thing because I would just forget to check on it and everything, and they are very, very needy. Well, eventually what happened was shortly after the Pokemon anime started, there was another anime based on Digimon called Digimon. And everyone called it this like Pokemon knockoff, and it's anything but. And now Digimon is this entire franchise. Like I said, it started off as a virtual pet, and then became an anime and had a bunch of video games, and they're all really fun. Digimon is one of my favorite, kind of intellectual properties, whatever you want to call it. One of my favorite series ever. Specifically, the first 3 Digimon cartoons are phenomenal. The first one blew my mind as a kid because it had a lot of kind of, not really adult themes, but it dealt with things that a lot of other children's cartoons weren't really dealing with. And then the second one had a really amazing kind of ending where they had a villain that was not just, ooh, I'm the bad guy. This is a villain that was motivated primarily from the fact that he was one of the people that helped create the digital world, but he was never able to travel there himself, and he saw all these other people going. And so he built this kind of resentment up. And so he finally got to the point, he's like, no, I'm going to make it to the digital world no matter what. And started doing evil things and using people and kids and stuff like that to get what he wanted. And so that was a plot point that I had to see before a kind of a villain that was more than just a caricature. And then the third season just went straight up dark with like murder and demon possession. It was weird as fuck and amazing. And then I kind of got out of Digimon for a while. But they've also had a bunch of video games. There's actually an MMO that is outright horrible. And I've loved Digimon. So why does that matter here? Well, I've done this quite a few other times before where I just try to come up in my head if I wanted to create kind of a monster taming RPG, tabletop RPG, how would I go about that? Because I've seen quite a few kind of homebrew uh, kind of hacks for a couple different systems where they've tried to make like a Pokemon TTRPG, which I've never seen one that has been particularly good. There's been some that technically work, but they don't really feel like Pokemon. And one of the big arguments against Digimon when it first came out is, oh, it's just copying Pokemon, and it wasn't. It was started as a completely separate thing. The subject matter are completely different. The audience is completely different, and the games themselves are very, very different. Despite the fact that they do have that kind of monster raising aspect, Digimon is a very, very different beast than Pokemon, and a tabletop RPG that was a Digimon style game would be very different than a Pokemon style game. But I thought it'd be a fun kind of thought experiment to try to come up with the building blocks, not actually like real design, but kind of the things that would be necessary if you were to make a monster taming tabletop RPG. Because monster taming has become an entire genre of video games and it's very, very popular. And so I was just trying to think, what kind of things would be necessary for that. And I think a Pokemon style TTRPG would be a little bit more complex than a Digimon style one where you have a single partner that you travel around with, whereas Pokemon gotta catch them all kind of aspect. So I'd like to start with kind of a Digimon, especially since Digimon 25th anniversary, more of a Digimon style game. So at its most basic, you could very easily just reskin any tabletop RPG as your Digimon is the character. Like if you're playing D&D 5th edition, your Digimon would be the barbarian, let's say, and then your character would just kind of travel around with them. But whenever you went into combat, the way that Digimon in general worked is the Digimon actually did the fighting. The Tamers did nothing. They always had a partner, and theoretically they were there to encourage their Digimon, and the connection with a human is what allowed the Digimon to digivolve. And so that was really the only kind of point of was the only kind of point of the partner. But from a mechanical standpoint, it would be very, very easy to basically have your Digimon actually does the fighting and that. But for something like Digimon in specifically, a huge, huge part of the lore is this act of Digivolution, which is different from like Pokemon Evolution, where Pokemon Evolution is, you get up to a certain level and then you evolve into a new form. Sometimes there's multiple forms you can go to, but you can never go back. You are now permanently that form. Digivolution is a temporary thing, and it generally only happens when it's necessary. And so that means that for a tabletop RPG, one of the things that would be kind of necessary to kind of emulate a Digimon style TTRPG would be the ability to have some sort of transformation that is partially controlled by the player that can get more powerful as you go. The idea of Koromon evolves into Agumon, evolves into Greymon, evolves into War Greymon. War Greymon, and then Metal Greymon Metal Greymon, then War Greymon. There we go. And so I would think in if we were to take some inspiration from like the Digimon games, because I actually kind of prefer how the Digimon games do Digivolution a little bit better. The way that most of the Digimon video games work is when your Digimon, and they actually act a little bit closer to Pokemon, but you can, where the Digivolution is technically a more permanent thing, but you can Digivolve down, you can Digivolve upward, and a lot of times, in order to get the most powerful Digimon, you have to be constantly uh, undigivolving, then redigivolving the same Digimon over and over and over again to get them the right stats to get up. So, what I think would make an interesting tabletop RPG, you would have your base Digimon, Koromon, Numamon, whatever it is. I don't think Numamon was a beginner level one, but whatever. You'd have your base one, and then as the game is played, and that particular choice at the beginning of the campaign would influence the eventual Digivolutions that it can go through, and it would give it some basic attacks. Normally, like your child level, I think, are what they called Digimon. I can't remember what the Digivolution levels are anymore. But anyway, your starter Digimon is basically only going to have like one attack and is going to be relatively weak, and they really don't fight in this stage. So that could effectively be your level 1 style thing, where you're not really meant to stay in level, like even in 5th edition, you're not really meant to stay in level 1 for more than a single session. Level 1 is only there really to introduce the game to you. So you could very easily start off with level 1. This is what we do. And then very quickly, by the time you get to, and introduce basically most of the game. And then when it gets time for your first real combat, that's when you would level up to level 2 or whatever. And that's when you would get your first Digivolution, which I think for each one of these starter or Digimon, you would need to have just a single Digivolution that goes up, just to make things easier and more simple. So you might have an Agumon, and then a Gabumon, and a Tentamon, and all those things like that. And then from there on, they could split off and do other things. And so whenever you are wandering around, your kind of base level for your Digimon is going to be that rookie form, Agumon, Gabumon, stuff like that. And then as you go, you will eventually unlock the ability to Digivolve at certain places, but it's going to be a limited resource. So there's going to be certain situations where it's in your best interest to just stick with Agumon as opposed to Digivolving to Greymon or anything else like that. And your Agumon specifically will have their own sets of abilities, and they'll level up a little bit, but eventually they'll get to the point where that particular form just doesn't really get any more abilities or more powerful, and that's when you'll unlock your first Digivolution. And based on the lore of the Digimon, there's a bunch of other things you can do. There's armor evolutions and DNA Digivolves, where you combine 2 into 1, which that would be a weird thing to deal with, but Essence 20 has done quite a few times where multiple characters or multiple players control the same character, so that could totally work. And then effectively, kind of in a similar way to the Strange, the Strange RPG, which is a Cypher System RPG, you would basically collect Digivolutions, where you would have somewhere on your character sheet, maybe on a second page, you would have your rookie form, and then you would list each one of your champion forms there, and then those champion forms could digivolve into, maybe 2 or 3 ultimate forms, and then the ultimate forms could eventually digivolve into mega forms. So, yeah, and there'd have to be some kind of limit as to how many, different digivolutions you can get and things like that. But I think it might be really interesting, especially since different things like if you go to Digimon Adventure 2, which in the US was just called Digimon Season 2. Each one of the Digidestined, except for Tai and Kari, got 2 different Digi-Eggs. And they had different things that they were useful for. Like for Davis, the Digi-Egg of Courage created Flame Dramon, which was kind of a bipedal character. He could shoot fire and stuff like that. Whereas the Digi-Egg of Friendship gave him, I can't remember what the Digimon was called, but it was a quadrupedal Digimon with like a knife spike horn thing on its head, and it could shoot lightning. And so one of the advantages of, I'm just going to look it up because I can't remember. Okay. Digimon Adventure 2. VMon! That's what it was. And he could digivolve too. Come on. Digimon Adventure 2. Demi Vmon, Flame Dramon, and what was the other one? Ray Dramon. Okay. So Ray Dramon was kind of like horse, like a dragon horse kind of thing. And so Davis could ride on Flame Dramon and be much, much faster. And so there were situations where Ray Dramon was more useful, and there'd be situations where Flame Dramon was more useful. There wasn't a whole lot of times in the anime that Vmon used Flame Dramon after he got Ray Dramon, but I think in the tabletop RPG, I think that would be much, much more useful. And then eventually, he got the Digi-Egg of Miracles, and he got Magnamon, which was super OP and was only used once. And then eventually also got the ability to just normally digivolve into X-Vmon, and then Paildramon, and Imperial Dramon. And yeah, so I think that would make a really, really interesting tabletop RPG where you would still have, and like that's one of the big parts of Digimon in general, is the kind of connection that the tamers or partners, depending on which series you're talking about, the tamers or the partners create this really, really strong bond with their Digimon. And so you would still have a single character that just has these multiple forms, kind of similar to like in Fabula Ultima. If you take the Arcanist class, you can kind of collect these different Arcanum that you can use and do cool stuff with. I would kind of consider a similar system where the Arcanum themselves are relatively basic. They will give you, a couple different abilities, some stat changes, and that's really it. And a system like that could very easily work as a kind of substitute for Digimon without having to make too many changes. And then we would just need to create a limited resource system that makes it not always the best option to just digivolve into whatever your strongest Digimon is and go to town. Probably, again, in the lore, if they didn't eat enough, they couldn't digivolve. So very easily that limited resource could be food in some way. So yeah, I think that would be kind of an interesting and fun game system. Like I like any system where you have like transformations and stuff like that, where you can make a choice and do something like the what is it? The Druid Circle of Stars Druid has the ability to choose a couple different forms that give them different benefits, or just your standard Circle of the Moon druid, where they can just transform into a bunch of different animals depending on what is useful in the situation. I like that style of character. I think that's a really interesting, fun character. And I think from a GM's perspective, designing situations where it's in the player's best interest to use different forms, like something that got a little bit old in campaign 1 of Critical Role was anytime Marisha went into combat, if she was going to be transforming into anything, generally it was going to be either Minxie, her tiger form, or when she got the ability to do elementals, she would do that, and that was really all she did, other than like casting spells and stuff like that. And to me, that was a little bit boring. She did do, and outside of combat, she did do other things, like she turned into a bird every so often. But I think there was a lot more. There was a lot more that she could have done by choosing different forms and the things like that could have made for more interesting encounters. And I think part of that was just on Marisha for being really, really new to D&D in general, and druids. Druids are one of the more complicated classes to play well in 5th edition. So nothing on her, like she wasn't a bad player or anything. She was just new. And then I think part of it was on Matt for just not creating situations that would have really exemplified and really showed off that thing. And that's something that I like to do, like for Zelda Universe, for Tears of the Realms. One of the things that I was really excited about when I was designing the campaign was the fact that I was going to be able to give basically different power sets to each one of the players. Like currently, for example, Chax's character, Zuriah, her normal kind of regular form is she can control shadows, which is cool, and that was the original character that we created. And Chax has an absolute blast playing her kind of default power set. Then, when we went to the Sheikah world, where it was this hyper technologically advanced, kind of very modern, almost dystopian society, she got the ability. Her focus changed to exist in 2 places at once. And one of the reasons for that is Chax, one of her favorite D&D classes is the Echo Knight Fighter. She just really, really loves the kind of clone aspect and thing. And so exists in 2 places at once just gives her the ability to create her own clone. And in order for me to kind of explain how the different focuses work, every time they have a different focus, their base power set changes to fit with the theme of the new focus. So what I did for her focus there is I basically said that she could create a hologram of herself, and her shadow powers turned into light powers whenever she had that focus equipped. And I don't think I could have anticipated the kind of interesting things that Chax would attempt to do with that, because simply by changing her ability, because her special item that she has is this kind of rod that she can gather shadows and mold them into really any tool or device that she wants. And she mostly uses it to attack, but there will be situations, like there was a situation that they were trying to hide from someone. She goes, well, I can form light now, right? Like before I could take shadows and kind of harden them and turn them into solid objects. Now can I do that with light? I said, yeah, that's basically how your power works. She's like, okay, then I want to create kind of a hologram thing of the wall here so that we can hide behind it and they won't be able to see us. And I put some limitations on, just to go, well, you've never done that before. So this is going to be a little bit more difficult, and you only have a limited amount of time to kind of build your light structure. But she rolled really well, and so that was something that she got to do. And so now she has a shadow version of herself that allows her to do kind of cool, interesting things. And then she also has a light version of her power set that allows her to do interesting, cool things. And then she also has, when we went to the Minish world, I gave her the ability to basically control nature. And so now all of her shadow powers are now nature powers, which makes for even more interesting, unique things that she's done. And so to me, coming up with ideas for basically different power sets that are going to give the players the most amount of choices and the most opportunity to just do things that I don't expect has been unbelievably fun. Some of the other things, like Kiri's character, her powers are kind of Aurora Borealis based, where she has this little fox creature that can kind of possess her and allow her to kind of shoot, little blasts of aurora at people. And then when she went to the Sheikah place, she went from having aurora powers to having a pet robot, which was really, really fun. And then when we went to the Minish world, I gave her electricity powers. And so now she can shoot lightning bolts and teleport long distances as a bolt of lightning and things like that. And her pet fox, Aki, or her fox partner, is not a pet, his partner. Her fox partner, Aki, now looks like Jolteon effectively. And so things like that are really, really fun. And so getting back to this Digimon kind of idea, I think a Digimon RPG that has a similar mechanic where when you Digivolve, you get kind of a different set of powers and abilities, and ensuring that they're different enough that the players are never going to go, oh, well, obviously I'm always going to use this one because this is the better one. Again, good game design gives you choices. Bad game design gives you right answers. So I think that could be really, really interesting and fun for a tabletop RPG. Again, this is just kind of the building blocks. Someone else would have to actually design a system that could do this. But I think it'd be a cool system. Now, moving on. If we wanted a more kind of monster tamer Pokemon style, which is significantly more common than the more Digimon style, like even the more recent Digimon games lean significantly more into the monster gotta catch 'em all style of Pokemon than they do the old Digimon stuff, which I think is a detriment. I still love them. I think they're amazing, but so for a more Pokemon-esque, first of all, obviously there has to be some sort of catch mechanic, which very easily could be. You would need to have your player character, and the player character themselves would have a very limited set of stats, and one of those stats would have to do with their ability to capture. And I think in that particular instance, I think it might be more interesting if you look at kind of the manga and the anime world instead of the video games. I guess in some way in the video games. There are certain trainers that specialize in particular Pokemon types. And I think that might be an interesting thing, especially when you look at some of the more modern Pokemon games where they have Pokeballs that are better at catching certain Pokemon, or catching Pokemon in certain environments or at certain times of the day. I think that might be a more interesting thing for your trainer, is to have some kind of specialization that they can choose, where they get bonuses to catching certain types of Pokemon. And I think that would make for a significantly more interesting thing, because you could basically have your Pokeballs would be your weapons. So they would add some kind of flat bonus, and then you would also have your kind of basic catching ability. And so catching a Pokemon, again, in everything, uh, the actual act of catching them is relatively simple. The more hit points they have, the more difficult they are. So more likely than not, I could see you having to roll over a number, and the number that you have to roll over is based on their hit points. Whether it's you actually have to roll higher than their hit points, or some kind of combination of other things. I think that would be very, very simple. And then things like status effects, which would need to be a part of this, would have a set amount that, in addition to the normal thing that a status effect would do, it would also have a set amount that it lowers that number that you have to roll over if you attempt to capture them. And yeah, I think that would make a pretty simple catch mechanic. As far as actually having Pokemon, again, you would need to have the Pokemon themselves would need to be their own characters. However, they would need to be significantly more simple than kind of your standard tabletop RPG character, because again, you're going to have multiple Pokemon, and in the Pokemon video games, the only real reason that you have different Pokemon is for type matching. Fire beats grass, grass beats water, water beats fire. So you want to have kind of a counter to everything. I think that would make for a really boring tabletop RPG, and I think that significantly undervalues just how cool Pokemon are in general. When you look at them in like the cartoon, where they can do a lot more than just fight battles for you. So I think having each Pokemon that you add have some sort of non-combat use, like Charmander and their fire can do fire-based things. Bulbasaur and his vine whips can reach things from high places or lift people up. So stuff like that. I think that would make it significantly more interesting. I think to avoid the fact, because there's over 1,000 Pokemon. No. I think to avoid just overwhelming everyone with a bunch of different like having to create over 1,000 different character classes effectively, I think what would work pretty well is to have kind of defined archetypes that maybe based on the types, like this is a fire Pokemon, this is a grass Pokemon, and they will have certain things that are in common with that archetype no matter what. And then the kind of variations would be just additional abilities or the things like that, like the difference between a Charmander and a Ponyta. Is going to be Ponyta is going to be faster. You can ride a Ponyta, whereas a Charmander you really can't. Stuff like that. But every member of a certain class would, or certain archetype would have the same kind of starting stats, same weaknesses, stuff like that. And again, I think, at least in the realm of Pokemon, I think it would make the most sense to have each Pokemon to type would have their own kind of class, and then to deal with multi-type Pokemons, because there's really not a ton of monotype Pokemon anymore. You would basically have hybrid classes where, maybe steel water has, this thing from steel type and this thing from water type. Again, to make things significantly easier so that you don't have to have 1,000 different Pokemon. You really only need to have, like 11 or 12 different types for your classes or your archetypes. And then each Pokemon would just be, we're going to add an additional thing. In addition, compared to the Pokemon games, where they have all these different abilities and technical machines and stuff like that, we would significantly simplify what each Pokemon can do, to make it work a little bit easier as a tabletop RPG, and also to encourage having multiple Pokemon and having multiple things covered by different characters. Because again, Pokemon, the video game, is a single player game, and the only time you interact with other people is if you are battling them, or in some of the more modern ones, if you're double battling or something like that. But it's not a cooperative thing, and tabletop RPGs, by definition, are cooperative. So having the fact that certain tamers are just going to be better at capturing certain Pokemon will encourage the different players to kind of vary the Pokemon that they keep with them, so that they all have different places to shine. And I probably also wouldn't allow them to carry 6 Pokemon at a time, because that would just get a little bit too confusing. I think limiting them to 3 would probably be more than enough for them to have variation, and then anytime they make it to a Pokemon Center, they can swap out which Pokemon they have. And then it's just as simple as, keep track of the experience for each one of your Pokemon. And yeah, and you have kind of an interesting thing. And obviously, if people wanted to get complicated, there's so many kind of mini-game style things in the Pokemon games that to turn into things like the beauty contests, and trying to think of some of the other ones that exist. There's tons of different stuff. So Pokemon breeding and stuff like that. Like if somebody really wanted to go to town, like if who is it that the Pokemon Company wanted to create a tabletop RPG, they could eventually release supplements so that you could have a bunch of other things that you could specialize in. Like maybe one of your players is a Pokemon is a Pokemon breeder, and kind of their specialty is not really catching their own Pokemon, but kind of buffing other people's Pokemon. Or maybe one of the players is a Pokemon photographer, and so their ability is kind of, maybe they're kind of more of a debuffer style thing, where they're good at kind of observing the enemy and being able to make their abilities less effective because they can warn their friends that this is coming. Stuff like that. Like there could eventually be something like that. But I think for the base game, I think that would be kind of an interesting thing. But I don't know, like I said, I like this kind of theory crafting of how could we make interesting tabletop RPGs that just don't exist right now. And I think that, monster catching or monster taming video games are really, really popular. And I just think it's because it's so complicated, most people think it kind of requires a video game, and I don't think necessarily that's true. It would just take a little bit of work to do something like that. So anyway, interested to hear what you guys think about stuff like that. Would you guys want to play a monster taming style tabletop RPG akin to like Pokemon? Would you prefer the more Digimon style of tabletop RPG? What are your thoughts? Otherwise, again, that's going to be all for me today. I will see you guys tomorrow. All right? Bye-bye.